You ever get that feeling that the ground is kind of shifting beneath our feet? The big ideas that used to hold everything together, our shared beliefs in truth, law, morality, they seem to be cracking. In this explainer, we're going to dig into what happens when those very foundations give way.
I know, it sounds like the setup for a really weird joke, doesn't it? But the answer, believe it or not, connects some super deep philosophy with the pop culture we see every single day. Because all of them, in their own way, explore a world without a safety net. A world where the old rules have just vanished.
I mean, just think about it for a second. We operate on this whole set of unspoken agreements, a belief in objective truth, a shared sense of what's right and wrong, a legal system that's supposed to be impartial. These are the pillars holding up our entire world. But what happens when you start poking at them and realize they might not be anchored to anything solid at all?
To really get a grip on this, we've got to go back to the philosopher who first took a sledgehammer to these foundations, Friedrich Nietzsche. And let me tell you, he wasn't just asking questions, he was trying to smash the whole structure.
This is easily Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood statement. When he had his character Zarathustra say this, it sent shockwaves through Western thought that, honestly, we are still feeling today. But it wasn't about scoring points in some theological debate.
Now, for Nietzsche, God was just a shorthand. It was a symbol for any ultimate authority, that one single source that gives us our moral compass and tells us what's true. So the death of God really meant the death of certainty. Without that single absolute foundation, we're all just left to wander, to figure things out on our own. So if there's no external authority, how do you even know if you're living a good life? Well, Nietzsche came up with this pretty radical test. Imagine a demon appears and tells you that this life you're living, with all its joy, its pain, and its flat-out boredom, is one you're going to live again and again, identically, forever. How do you react? With despair or with joy?
Your reaction really shows the two paths forward. The first one is nihilism, that descent into meaninglessness, where the thought of living your life on repeat becomes an unbearable curse. But the second path, that's the ultimate affirmation. It forces you to take absolute responsibility for your choices, to create a life so meaningful to you that you joyfully live it over and over again.
So how does all this abstract philosophy actually apply to the real world? Well, let's start with the law. If there's no ultimate foundation for morality, what does that mean for the legal systems that we've built on top of it?
This is the huge question at the heart of James Martell's work. He noticed that even the thinkers who reject solid foundations, people like Nietzsche, they seem kinda hesitant to let go of the law completely. They shrink it down to what he calls a sort of remnant, this ghostly figure that's barely there but still has an effect. They bring it right to the vanishing point, but they never quite push it over the edge.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting. This whole idea of life without a net isn't just some abstract theory. We see it played out in our culture all the time. So let's look at 3 case studies that really bring this to life.
First up, zombies. Yep, zombies. The zombie apocalypse is the ultimate thought experiment for what happens when society just completely collapses. When the dead are walking, the old legal codes don't mean a whole lot. So how do you rebuild? What kind of law emerges from all the ruins?
Well, you see a pretty stark contrast in leadership, right? On one side, you have Rick Grimes, the reluctant leader who's constantly torn between his old democratic ideals and just brutal necessity. Then you have his total opposite, the governor. He's an absolute tyrant. He creates this twisted society that's not built on justice, but on what philosophers call jouissance, this kind of perverse, excessive enjoyment of power and violence. He is the law, and his only command is pretty much enjoy. Next up, we're moving from fiction to a documentary that radically blurs the line with reality, The Act of Killing. The film follows the actual perpetrators of the Indonesian mass killings of the mid-60s, men who are still celebrated as heroes in their society today. So the filmmakers asked these men to reenact their murders in the style of their favorite Hollywood movies. So you have gangster films, musicals, westerns. It's surreal. And as one critic perfectly puts it, this creates a morally obscene jouissance of impunity. The killers become the directors and stars in the story of their own crimes, just reveling in what they did without any sense of guilt.
And this is the terrifying question the film really leaves us with. In this society, the foundational line between hero and murderer, between truth and performance, has completely collapsed. These killers are looked up to as founding fathers. So, what does justice even mean in a world like that?
Okay, for our final case study, let's step into the courtroom.
We tend to assume the law is built on a foundation of objectivity, where language is precise and clear. But what happens when we look really closely at one of the most crucial and yet invisible roles in the room, the court interpreter?
The legal system idealizes the interpreter as an invisible, interpreting machine that just swaps out words. But the research shows the reality is way more complex. Interpreters are cultural mediators. They are performing emotional work, building trust, managing politeness. They don't just translate words, they translate meaning, navigating these tricky power dynamics. A savvy lawyer might even use the delay from interpreting as a strategic advantage to give their client more time to think. So that supposedly objective foundation of language, it's revealed to be a deeply human and very subjective performance.
So, we've seen how our foundations, from law to language, are way less solid than they appear. And the result can be chaotic, terrifying, and brutal, for sure. But for Nietzsche, all of that chaos, that wasn't actually the greatest danger. He saw a much more subtle, and honestly a more chilling threat on the horizon.
In his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche prophesied the coming of the last man. This wasn't some hero or some monster. The last man was something far worse, the ultimate embodiment of mediocrity, the absolute endpoint of human ambition. So the last man seeks comfort above all else. He takes zero risks because, well, ambition is just too much work. In this world, as Nietzsche wrote, nobody wants to be rich or poor, because both are just too burdensome. There's no leader, just one big herd, where everyone is comfortably equal. Life is all about having your little pleasures for the day and night. And the scariest part? The last man truly believes he has discovered happiness.
And this really gets to the heart of Nietzsche's warning. His ultimate fear wasn't a zombie apocalypse or a gangster paradise. The real horror was a society that loses its foundations, only to replace them with nothing. A passionless contentment where no one is willing to suffer for a great goal because it's simply too much trouble. As you can see, for Nietzsche, the greatest danger isn't chaos, it's comfort.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty challenging question. When the old maps to meaning are all gone, what do? Do we face the terror and freedom of that void and try to create something new to draw a whole new map? Or do we just huddle together for warmth, blinking in the sun, content that we have, at long last, discovered happiness?